This is an election night update from WCIA3 News, your local election headquarters.
Good evening, I'm Jen Lask, and I've got Paul Cicchini here, and we are going to be bringing in Mark Maxwell in Taylorville to bring us the latest updates on the 13th Congressional.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to hear from Mark finally, because I want to hear a little bit more about this race.
Yeah, Jen and Paul, good evening from Taylorville. It's been an interesting night. We're here at the Knights of Columbus Hall. It's been spread out, mostly quiet. The campaigns are both hunkered down, watching these results come in slowly but surely, waiting to see which direction this race might go. Still very early, too close to call at this time, but this has been a vigorous race, tight on both sides, a lot of attack ads. We've seen those. Money came flooding into this district from all over the country, but it really came down to manpower and messaging. For the Davis campaign, they were flexing their volunteer muscle down the stretch, if you will, showing 500 some volunteers hitting the pavement these last few days, making as many contacts with voters from that safe distance as they could, trying to get out the vote. For the Dirksen Londrigan campaign, it came down to her message. She really wanted to push her promise not to take away any health insurance coverage for pre-existing conditions, and they're banking on big turnout from college students on the campuses throughout the district there. For the Republicans, they're looking to rural voters, hoping that's where the biggest turnout comes in, and we're still getting our first read of those numbers to see how this all could go. One interesting note, several of the bigger counties, with the more populated counties in the 13th district, do plan to count their early mail-in ballots first. Those were expected to skew Democratic. So as you watch these results come in, keep that context in mind. That's what we're seeing. It does seem to align with that expectation so far, and it seems on track for what we saw in 2018, a very close race decided by just about 2,058 votes.
As you said, Mark, the numbers have been rolling in obviously very slowly, and just a slight lead for the Democratic challenger.
Yeah, at this time, and again, this is an election night watch party unlike any I've ever covered before. Certainly, you usually expect to see adoring supporters pouring into a building with balloons and confetti in the rafters. That's not happening here tonight. We do hope to hear from Congressman Davis in person after he emerges with a result in hand, if they have one tonight. Democrat Betsy Dirksen Londrigan will be joining us online, virtually. Both of those campaigns, again, pretty quiet right now. They're parsing through the data, looking at the numbers, but we still haven't quite heard any clear insight from either campaign on where this race might be headed. We could be around waiting and watching for a while yet here tonight to see a result.
Earlier in the day, from Congressman Davis about how he was feeling. Was he generally very confident in what he expected from tonight's results, or is he maybe more cautious based on what happened in 2018 and the general sense of what people are feeling about congressional races across the country and the expectation that Democrats are going to gain on their advantage in the House?
Well, certainly, Paul, that's a great question. Every candidate going into a close race, they convey confidence, but do they really mean it? Do they really feel they can win? He does have 4 wins under his belt, back to back to back to back, right? So it's hard to bet against an incumbent when he knows his district. You don't win 4 races back to back without a few friends back home. They do feel like they're turning out rural voters this time. So the Davis campaign, all signs point toward a close victory tonight from their perspective. But if you ask the Dirksen Londrigan campaign, they're saying very much the same thing. So both sides conveying confidence. We'll see how that evolves over the night as we see these results start to come in.
All right, thank you, Mark. We will be checking in with you throughout the night. Now, Paul, Mark had mentioned to you this back-to-back-to-back confidence that Rodney Davis hopes he'll be able to continue this time. And Senator Durbin already knows that he is back-to-back-to-back-to-back one more time with a win. And you had been talking with Jessica and Jennifer earlier about the balance of power in the Senate and how Senator Durbin plays into that going forward.
Yeah, certainly there's no question this year very much about the House. I mean, that's not in question. Democrats are poised to certainly maintain control. of the House as far as that goes. The big question is in the Senate and whether Democrats can take control of the Senate. And there are several races that Democrats are keeping a close eye on. One of those is in Alabama. Doug Jones obviously won the race there against what many people perceived as a weak candidate, a weak Republican candidate in that race. He has a much tougher challenge this year against Tommy Tuberville, former Auburn football coach, in that Alabama Senate race. That is one where the early results so far have Doug Jones down. Democrats didn't necessarily expect to keep that seat. There are several much more competitive races in the Senate where they expect to pick up some seats. One of them that's also going to be a tough contest is Susan Collins' seat in Maine. That's against Sarah Gideon. A lot of money was spent on that race. Another huge money race, Jamie Harrison's contest against Senator Lindsey Graham. Obviously, Lindsey Graham was on TV very often during that Supreme Court nomination fight. Not much of a fight, really. I mean, Republicans pushed that through with Judge Coney Barrett, now Supreme Court Justice Coney Barrett. But Jamie Harrison, huge fundraising in that Senate race. Those ads, I mean, we see political ads all the time on TV, but Jamie Harrison got tens of millions of dollars, record-breaking numbers. We saw Beto O'Rourke in Texas fundraising records. Obviously, that's a big state, but in South Carolina, Jamie Harrison raised a ton of money. In North Carolina, Tom Tillis, a first-term senator, has a very tough re-election fight against a Democrat, Cal Cunningham. That's a close race that Democrats are keeping an eye on. Over in Colorado, Cory Gardner is running for re-election as a Republican, but former Governor John Hickenlooper is giving him a challenge. Hickenlooper appears to be winning that race. He was, remember, a presidential candidate in the beginning of this presidential cycle when tons of Democrats were running for that race, but Hickenlooper appears to be poised to be Colorado's junior senator in that contest. So that's one that Democrats obviously have an eye on. So, you know, Democrats, as we mentioned earlier in the evening, need to net 4 seats to just get an outright majority. 3 seats if Joe Biden wins this race for the White House, 50-50 split, and then obviously Kamala Harris would break any 50-50 ties.
And that is something that we are going to be watching very closely. Now, I had asked Paul just a few minutes before we started this, you know, do you know what's coming up in 10 minutes when you're on air again? And the answer has been no. And that is because, you know, this is a night like nothing else that we've seen before. Expect the unexpected. But for some of the people that have expected the unexpected, you know, Lindsey Jones has been checking in with them. And Lindsey, you just talked with someone whose responsibility has been keeping an eye out for some of these abnormalities, if you will, at the polling sites. And can you tell us a bit about what you're hearing right now that polls have been closed for close to 2 hours?
Yeah, definitely. So we can definitively say that the coronavirus pandemic did contribute to the increase in requests for mail-in ballots across the state. As far as other issues go that may have been anticipated this particular election season, the Illinois chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union refers callers who are reporting election-related issues like voter intimidation or voting access restrictions to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. It's a national group. They have a Chicago chapter. And the ACLU's point person told us they only referred a few callers to that number today. But I just got off the phone with Ami Gandhi. She's senior counsel at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. She says this year they assembled a team of 300 volunteers who are ready to help voters all across the state, not just Chicago, but downstate Illinois as well. And she said this year, today, they had a record number of calls for help, calls for assistance from people who wanted to vote, people who were at polling places who were experiencing issues, casting their ballots. Most of those issues were able to be resolved. She said that's partially due to the way that Illinois has set up its voting registration system. You can register to vote even on as late as Election Day. So that was a positive. But COVID-19 did result in some voters being disenfranchised. She said that there were people who called in today that said they had recently tested positive for COVID-19. They called too late to get a mail-in ballot, to get it postmarked by today, the deadline. And some of those people who, you know, tested positive or recently found out that they had gotten it weren't able to cast their ballot. So she said that that was something that they were keeping an eye on. She didn't have a definitive number of how many people specifically called with that issue, but she said going forward that we need to look at strengthening voting options for people who are suddenly in a contagious situation like that, or who find themselves suddenly unable to access whether that's mail-in voting or in-person voting at the last minute. And so she said, looking at the future, we need to strengthen democratic access, and that doesn't stop with Election Day 2020.
All right, thank you for that update, Lindsay. We'll be back with you shortly. And Paul, we have one more update before I know you need to get going so that you can get ready to give all of our viewers updates on air on Channel 3. So let's talk a little bit about Colorado.
Yes, that balance of power thing we were just talking about in one of the races that we were talking about focusing on. Cory Gardner, the Republican seeking re-election, and the Associated Press called that Senate race in Colorado for John Hickenlooper, the former governor. So Cory Gardner will not be returning to Washington. So that is one Senate seat that Democrats have picked up so far. And one other race that Democrats are keeping an eye on, and this one is not necessarily as likely, but it could be a good indicator for Democrats as well in the presidential race, is Iowa. Iowa could be a surprise pickup for Democrats in the presidential race and in the Senate, and these would probably go hand in hand. Joni Ernst has somewhat of a tough re-election fight. She had a debate with Teresa Greenfield that didn't go very well there. That obviously is a big farming state. A lot of focus on agriculture, and Joni Ernst she made a major flub over some questions that dealt with prices for soybeans and corn, and that did not go over well with voters. So that race has been very close, and that's one that Democrats are certainly keeping an eye on as well. So one Senate seat picked up so far, so Democrats are going to be keeping a close eye on that, but of course they did lose that Doug Jones Senate seat, so that's probably a net zero at this point right now. They will, I say, lose that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us for this digital live stream cut-in. We will let you get back to getting ready for the next cut-in with Jennifer and Jessica. And to everyone else who's been watching, join us again in 5 minutes. So go grab food if you need to. We're going to go get some election pizza, I'm sure. But we will be back with much more throughout the night. Thank you so much for watching.
The election results continue here on WCIA 3 News, your local election headquarters.